This episode of On the Beat is brought to you by Engles. Shop online with Engles Curbside Pickup. New curbside stores opening every week. Please welcome Mike Griffith.
Well, hey everybody, Mike Griffith here. Welcome to tonight's Engles on the Beat. As usual, another great show for you. As usual, another great guest on tap, Chris Lowe of ESPN, scheduled to join me. Looking forward to talking to Chris. Go way back with Chris Lowe, and he will be the guest in segment 2, scheduled to be the guest in segment 2. We always have to say is expected to. Did you ever wonder why when you read stories, someone will say so-and-so is expected to? Well, Caleb Downs is the answer for why you say is expected to. And I start out not to pick the scab, but to kind of put the finishing touch and add some perspective on it. If you haven't read my column yet on DawgNation.com, it's called The Dooley Effect, the Dooley Code. And I kind of came up with that when I was going through, the Facebook pages and the Twitter X, and I was seeing some really angry people, and they were coming up with all these reasons why this player may not have chosen Georgia. And I kind of just thought, no, wait a minute. You don't know that. You shouldn't suppose that. You shouldn't think that. Everybody's kind of losing their junk over this. And I thought, that's not what I equate to Georgia. And granted, I come from an innocent age of newspaper back in the 90s when I covered Alabama and Auburn, and into the 2000s when I covered Tennessee. And when I came to Sanford Stadium, I came with the other team. And so I saw Georgia fans from the other side. And I always just thought, man, what a classy, dignified fan base. You'd go to the game and it seemed like everyone was just, dressed so nice and everybody was just so happy. And fans never really seemed that crazy to me. And all the dealings that I had with Georgia a lot of them were through the PR guy, Claude Felton. You've heard me talk a lot about him because he's kind of been the front man. He's the guy that everybody relates to when they come in from outside, and he's just the best at what he does. And then what we would see, and even going back further to my childhood when I would watch Georgia on TV, you would see Vince Dooley. And Coach Dooley just had so much class and so much dignity. And you think about how he dressed and how he acted and how he spoke. And there was just a certain air about Georgia. And I thought that Ray Goff continued that. And I know that the teams weren't fantastic. He had some tough injuries. Coach Goff did recruit Will Muschamp and Kirby Smart. Don't know where you'd be without those guys. Coach Goff was an SEC Player of the Year and did win an SEC championship as a quarterback. But and then Coach Donnan was here for a bit. And then Mark Richt came in. And Mark Richt is just a prince of a guy. I mean, I would put Mark Richt up there with Bobby Bowden at the most universally beloved coaches maybe in history, and Vince Dooley as well. And so even Kirby, even though Kirby's a little chippy and ornery because he's always so hungry to win, he's always polite to the other team. He never really dog cusses the other team. Even when he's upset, you can kind of tell, but he does it in a way where he says nice things with a grimace, or the nice things maybe aren't as nice as other teams will say. But the point is that there's still a lot of class at Georgia. And the reason I bring all that up is because when fans go off on social media, and again, we're only talking about 10%. Every fan base has that 10%, right? The old saying, at least what I tell myself, because I do a lot of stuff that draws reaction, and there's 10% of the people that are always going to love me, love you, keep writing emails, send those emails, appreciate it. Then there's the 10% that are always going to hate you. You know who you are, doesn't matter what I say. And then there's 80% in between. They're like, you know what? Sometimes I agree with you. Sometimes I don't agree with you. But I appreciate you telling me like it is, right? So I'm telling you like it is tonight. When you make anonymous attacks on people's character, that's not good, okay? I use the word cowardly because I think it's bad. I think it's one of the worst things that's happened with social media is the anonymity that empowers people to write things that they would never say in person about people that they've never met. And I don't think it's funny when people put the fake headlines on Facebook and say the mean stuff. I think that's terrible. Like, that's a bad sense of humor. It's like 8th grade humor. It's like, no, don't do that. If there's any doubt in your mind, if you should push the button, don't push the button. That's what I've learned. As someone that's on social media professionally, if I ever have a doubt, no, leave it out. If you have a doubt, leave it out. And I say that because we're in a new era of college football. It's not an amateur sport anymore. These families are making business decisions now. Okay. This isn't about loyalty or patronage or that's my favorite team. It's a business decision. And Georgia has a fantastic program and all sorts of reasons why the number one recruiting class signed on with Kirby Smart. But it's not for everyone. I'll give you an example. When I joined the military, way back when, I wanted to go somewhere else. If there was a base near my high school, I wouldn't have wanted to stay in state. I wanted to see the world. I wanted to get out there. I wanted to go somewhere. Sometimes that's what kids want. Maybe that's what happened with Caleb Downs. He was just kind of far enough away at Alabama, and now he's up at all. Maybe he just didn't want to be right in his backyard. All of his friends still around. Hey, can you get me tickets? Let's hang out. Potential distractions. I mean, that happens to these guys. And I think that's why some of the top players in Georgia leave the state, because they don't want those distractions. They recognize, hey, I need to get away. And I think conversely, that's why Georgia can draw guys from other states. Now, there's some guys that want to stay in state. They've got their support network, their family around them that are right there. Trevor Etienne's at Georgia because it's in the same region. His mom wanted him close to Jacksonville. That worked in Georgia's favor. He wanted to be here. That fantastic recruit from Florida, which, by the way, these transfer ratings came out, and Etienne was number 12. I think he's top 5. I think this guy is phenomenal. I cannot wait to see Trevor Etienne in a Georgia uniform. I think he's going to have multiple 100-yard games. I'm envisioning DeAndre Swift. And that's setting the bar very high, because DeAndre was one of those guys that absolutely thrilled me and excited me. Every time he touched the ball, I felt like Swift was a threat to go the distance. So the way he cut. And when I talked about short yardage struggles, he looked me in the eye and said, okay. And then the next game, he ran over everybody and made every third and fourth down conversion run. And I was like, all right, challenging Swift. Swift's like, all right, I can do that. And I think Etienne's going to be that guy. He's got to get better in pass protection. He's got to finish runs better. That'll happen. He'll bow up. He'll get all Georgia'd up. He'll get all Kirby'd up. Kirby will put him through the ropes in a couple of those practices over the loudspeaker and Etienne. But my point is, there's so many great players on the Georgia team. Last week, Georgia had 3 players make freshman All-American. The only 2 schools made that Football Writers of America All-American team. Only 2 schools had 3. Clemson and Georgia. C.J. Allen, Peyton Woodring, Ernest Green. That was fantastic news, but nobody's talking about that. I look on the internet, I look on Twitter and X, and I look on Facebook, and there's no threads on that. People are whining and moaning and complaining about a guy that you never had. I mean, come on, get a grip. Show that Georgia class. Celebrate what you have. Stop worrying about the guys that get away. There's going to be guys, top guys, that aren't going to come to Georgia. It's just the way it is. But Kirby's got the number 1 class and is a preseason number 1 and goes into next season with 25-game home win streak and 27 straight SEC wins, just stupid streaks all over the place. So when I see Georgia fans come unglued, I want to reach out and kind of tap them on the shoulder and say, hey, take a deep breath, man. You're at the zenith. You're at the top of the world. Don't show that attitude. Don't be ugly about it. Show class. Hey, if Caleb Downs wants to go to Ohio State, cool. Good for him, his family, his decision. Don't make excuses. Oh, they must have paid him more. They didn't want. No, don't make excuses. Just stop it. There's good people at Ohio State. You know who I'm rooting for right now? C.J. Stroud. When I interviewed C.J. Stroud last year, I felt so bad when I read that guy's story. Read C.J. Stroud's backstory. Google him. Georgia recruited this kid. Google C.J. Stroud's backstory and see what he went through in his youth. And he left it all on the field at Ohio State, and he didn't win a Big Ten title. And he came up short against Georgia. But that kid showed so much class and character that I rooted for him this year. And now he's putting his money back into Ohio State and helping them get players. Don't you wish and don't you hope that you'll see that from Georgia players that are in the NFL? So I'm rooting for C.J. Stroud. I tip my cap to Ohio State. I think they're a darn good program. And what they went through with Michigan and the whole spy thing, And I don't mind Ryan Day. I really don't. I mean, I think he's a good coach, but you got to be a great coach there. So I don't get ugly about it. I don't harbor that ill will. I respect, I appreciate, I try to put myself in other shoes. And covering Georgia, it's easy to do that. Because like this program's number one. When I have Chris Lowe on here in just a few minutes, you're going to hear Chris talk about this. And Chris talks from 10,000 feet. He's a national writer for ESPN. He breaks 75% of the coaching stories. He's really plugged in, does a fantastic job, and has for decades, really. And he's going to give you his perspective on Kirby Smart and Georgia in the SEC and in the NIL. I want to mention basketball off the top. You know, Jabri Abdur-Rahim, Silas Demery Jr., all right? The fact that I'm giving you basketball players and names tells you what's happening. Those guys are starting to carve out an identity. And yeah, they lost at Kentucky, but you got to appreciate this. Can you imagine being Mike White, going to Kentucky, the highest scoring team in the country, the number one field goal percentage team in the SEC, the number one turnover assist ratio team you're playing the fastest, the biggest, the best executing, and you're going up there for a Saturday night game in Rupp Arena with more than 20,000 people. It just doesn't get any louder, any better than that. Okay? Until it did. So we're at the 16-minute mark. I'm watching the game, and all of a sudden, here comes off the bench. True story. This guy's 7'2", and he shoots 3-pointers. The 7'2" Croatian. And I'm thinking, what in the, and sure enough, look at this. Well, earlier today, the NCAA approved the 7'2", 235-pound Croatian to play tonight. And of course he goes bonkers. And I'm going, this guy's like a video game character. Like when I would play my son and he would create these characters, I'd say, you can't do that. You can't make a 7'2" guy that shoots 3-pointers at a 40% clip. It's not realistic. Well, I'm watching it, and he's on the Kentucky team. And Georgia happens to be the team that's playing him, right? So if you're Mike White, you got to go, oh, for God's sakes, really? And Kentucky goes up 28. But you know what these dogs did? They fought back. They only lost by, 8 or 9 points? Look, respect, right? Jabri Abdur-Rahim scored 34, dropped 7 3-pointers, man. And Silas Demery Jr. had a career high freshman. You got to see this guy. This guy plays with fire, man. If Kirby goes to the game Wednesday, he's going to love this guy. This guy could play running back at Georgia, Silas Demery Jr. Ferocious freshman. He gets 22. And Georgia walks out of there heads high, pride intact, respectable final score. And now they got to come home, beat LSU Wednesday night. And Georgia is already like opening the gates for all the freshmen get in free, or excuse me, all the students get in free with an ID. Like they're going to pack it out. It's a 6:30 game. It's a tough midweek games. So they're like, you know what? We're going to do whatever we got to do to get kids there, to get a crowd there. Because this next game against LSU is the kind of game that Georgia has to win. You have to win home games against non-NCAA tournament teams like LSU. You cannot take a step back. If this team is going to make the NCAA tournament and they're angling for it and they're playing like it and it's looking like it could happen, but right now they're on the bubble of the bubble, they've got to beat teams like LSU. And then they got to take care of business in Gainesville Saturday. It's a whole nother show. That'll be next Monday. We'll talk about Mike White going back to Gainesville with a team that can beat the Gators. The Gators are the other team on the fringe. There's 7 or 8 SEC teams. They're looking like NCAA tournaments. Somehow South Carolina is still in Lenardi's bracket. They're one of those fringe teams, right? The Gators are one of those fringe teams. This is a game, Georgia. If they can win in Gainesville, that would be a huge victory and a big step to getting them in the field of 64. And there's a lot of tough games left. They still got to play Bruce Pearl and Auburn twice. That ain't going to be easy. They still got to play Alabama. They got to make a trip to Arkansas. But they're playing tough. They're playing well. And I'm hearing Georgia fans talking loudly about this team. And they're coming out to see the Bulldogs under Mike White in year 2. Everything this team has worked for. And I appreciate that because I've been here 5, 6 years and I've seen some teams shine at times. The Ant-Man era was exciting at times. I always wondered what would have happened if COVID hadn't stopped the tournament because Ant-Man was going to play all the way through. Even though he was the number 1 overall pick, he was going to play in that tournament. He wasn't going to opt out because Ant-Man was all that. He was such a good dude. I hope that you had the opportunity to see Anthony Edwards when he was here. Nick Claxton, he was another dude. I mean, Crean had some dudes. Unfortunately, the culture was just so far behind. And that was a time when you pretty much had to get under NBA and FBI investigation to recruit guys to compete in the SEC. It seemed like half the league was under investigation. Crean just wasn't going to do it. Now you got NIL, and Georgia's spending a little bit of money. And what do you know? They got a competitive roster, and Mike White is coaching them up. So good times for Georgia. If you're a Georgia fan, it's a good time to be following football, to be looking forward to next season, to be looking forward to the offseason, the spring, the competition. Kirby adding another quarterback potentially. Right now, I want to take a short break. When we come back, expecting Chris Lowe to be in here at any point. But right now, Engles is here. And you know this ad. We always watch the ad. You guys know the jingle. You guys know the message. We love it. We appreciate it. It's something that we can count on every week, Engles. And I want to thank my sponsor, Engles. And right now, I want to bring you this message from Engles.
Did you know that Engles sells more organics than any other store? Or that they run their own dairy? Or that they only serve USDA choice and prime meat? Did you know that they have more local craft beer than any place else? Or that they have Energy Smart stores? Or that they professionally slice and package imported cheese from Europe? Did you know about their giant international aisle, local farm partnerships, curbside pickup, wine department? Or that they donate 3,956 meals a day to local food banks? Well, now you do. It's all in the bag. Engles, low prices, love the savings.
Welcome back to the program. Mike Griffith here, segment 2, thinking about NIL dealings, thinking about transfer rules, thinking about how the early transfer window overlaps with early signing day, how that also overlaps with the juniors that are going to declare early for the NFL draft, and the formula that the coaches have to go through as they're trying to make decisions on their roster, right? Every player pretty much can renegotiate their deal after every season. It's almost as if players are on a year-to-year contract and a year-to-year deal. And when incoming freshmen come in, you can imagine the chemistry issues this causes. If a freshman comes in and he's got some monster deal, big payroll, what if it's more than a returning player? What if Dalen Everett isn't making as much as KJ Bolden? If you're Dalen Everett, you're like, well, now wait a minute. I've been here a year, coach. Can I get that salary? Can I get that raise? And if you're Kirby, what do? Right? Some guys you got to pay more for on the front end. And that's challenging. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have Chris Lowe on tonight to talk about this with me, because I do think that this is something that college football has got to change, evolve, something with the calendar. Michael, if you can let me know when Chris is here, love to get Chris involved in the conversation. Don't know if Chris is having some issues connecting, but this is something that I think has to evolve. Number one is the calendar. I don't know that they can do much as far as players getting paid. Like, that cat's out of the bag. That toothpaste is out of the tube, so to speak. So players are going to get paid. I don't think you can do much about the transfer portal and players' ability to go from one school to another school with freedom. I don't think you can restrict them into just staying at one school. I think they're going to have that freedom, and otherwise you're running into some antitrust things. So if that's going to be the case, if players are going to get paid, if players are going to have the opportunity to change from one school to the next school, and maybe even twice. For a while there, they were saying, okay, you can only do this once and you can't do it again until you graduate. Now they're saying, well, that's not going to hold up in court. So I think what they have to do is they have to get a calendar that works. I think they have to find out a way to make this work where there can be some order and some semblance of where a guy comes in and he transfers in, and now you do your signing class, and now the guys declare. I think the tough part about all this is that the NFL doesn't really have any incentive to work with college on this. Like, what if they changed their way of doing things where, like, maybe guys didn't have to declare so early, You could move the window back when guys could declare for the NFL, so the coaches could have a better idea of what their roster was. I'm not sure if that would work or not. I think we're going to try and bring Chris in. I know that there was a connection issue. He's been snowed in up there in Knoxville. Chris, can you hear me okay? Chris, can you hear me all right? I think we're having trouble with our connection here. Apologize for that. If you guys haven't seen it, Knoxville got hit with ice and snow, and they've pretty much been shut down for a week. Now, as the crow flies, Athens, Georgia is directly 120 miles south of there. Now, as you know, to drive there, you got to drive to Atlanta and then drive back up through Chattanooga, like 45 degrees this way, 45 degrees that way. But they got hit with a terrible snowstorm. And then ice and freezing rain and roads, and their school's been out for a week. They've had all sorts of troubles. And I know Chris lives in one of those really nice neighborhoods. It's a little far out. Normally you're like, oh man, this is beautiful. You like to live out in the countryside by the mountain and all that. Well, when there's snow and ice, it can make things complicated. And it seems like we might be having some technical issues tonight, and apologize for that. That can happen from time to time. NIL portal window solutions. Again, this was something that I've been thinking a lot about. I know Kirby talked about maybe two different plans, right? A kid comes in and signs one of two different types of scholarships. He can either sign a 3-year scholarship where he's kind of locked into that school and the school's locked into him, or he can sign like a year-by-year scholarship. And maybe that's kind of a different deal where, okay, it's year to year. You can renegotiate every year, but the school can also drop you, for lack of a better word. I don't know. I mean, that seemed like one of the options. I think Kirby, probably more than any other coach that I've talked to or heard speak, has really kind of embraced the concept of this while still trying to maintain the conventional way of recruiting talent and developing it. I mean, he said point blank, if he could just do it with his guys and keep all his guys, he would love to do that. But I did a story last week, and I just listed a laundry list of guys that have gone to other schools. I think of the 21 guys from Georgia that have gone in the portal, and I want to say 18 of them have been scholarship players. All 18 of those guys went to Power 5 schools where they will be a starter or a backup. Think about that. Guys that were not good enough to make it at Georgia or coming off an injury. I don't think Georgia really lost anybody that they didn't want to lose. Maybe Brock Vandegrift. I mean, definitely Brock Vandegrift. I know Kirby didn't want to lose Brock. He's such a fantastic player and leader and such a fantastic attitude. But Brock's been waiting 3 years, and he can go right to Kentucky and play. And I think everybody understood that. He did that on the front end. There was no negotiation. There was no dragging it out. It was, we're out. They didn't know what Beck was going to do. It was just time for them to go. And it's what the family decided and didn't want to be a distraction. Other than Brock Vandegrift, maybe A.J. Harris, maybe 2 or 3 guys. But most of the guys, they weren't going to play. And Kirby said at the bowl game, and it really shocked me, and maybe it shouldn't have shocked me, but it did, when he said, hey, guys, the transfer portal is not such a bad thing. It's a good thing. You guys got to try, stop making a bad thing. I was like, wow, that was a different perspective from Kirby, but you come to understand why. If guys are in their 3rd year or 4th year and they're not playing, then they probably need to look somewhere else. And they don't want to stay and compete, then they probably need to look somewhere else. He'd rather have that than have guys in the locker room that are unhappy, causing drama, that are upset, that don't have a good attitude. And then he can bring in a whole new batch of young players to compete. So, Kirby's kind of one of those guys that says, hey, deal me the cards. I don't got time to complain about it. It's my job to try to win with it. He's just a can-do guy. He's one of those guys, we always hear people say, if you got stuck on a deserted island with any SEC coach, which one would you want to be stuck on the island with to get off? And the answer is Kirby, because the minute that he was on that island, he wouldn't be feeling sorry for himself and beating the sand crying. He'd be working at ways to figure out how to get off the island. He's just a guy that doesn't rest, just never complacent, never satisfied. The glass is always half empty from the standpoint of pushing to try to make things better. And I think that's been part of the magic for Georgia football. And when people, talk to me about Kirby Smart and they ask me, how things are at Georgia and why it is the way it is, I explain to them, it's Kirby Smart, it's Kirby's attitude, it's Kirby's ability to adapt, and it's his sense of urgency. I did a radio show a couple weeks ago, and somebody said, well, hey, Mike, it's that time of the year, not a lot going on. Maybe, people can relax around Athens a little bit. And I said, absolutely not. There's never there's never nothing going on. I mean, there's always something going on in that football building, whether Kirby's recruiting, whether he's interviewing coaches, there's never a break. I think the guys had a couple weeks off before they went back to training, their off-season conditioning program. I mean, this is when the championships are won, like right now. How hard are these guys going to work, and how are they going to develop, some people, I talk to, and I'll get into this in the next segment. When I look at next year's Georgia team, there's guys that got to get better for Georgia to win a championship. I mean, Georgia, with what they got back, I mean, that is not a team that you put on the field and I go, yep, they're going to win a title. That's a team you put on the field and I say they got to get better. Now, and in the past years, they do get better.
Hey, Mike, we have our guest.
Oh, do we have Chris joining us now?
We do.
That's great. Chris, can you hear me all right?
Yeah, Mike, I'm sorry. I was watching you and was listening to what you said, but it was almost like you were talking underwater. I couldn't understand what you were saying. So I got you loud and clear right now.
Well, great to have Chris Lowe join us. Of course, everybody knows Chris from ESPN.com. Chris is a national writer. I go back into the 90s with Chris. Chris was a Tennessee beat writer at the Tennessean when I was in Knoxville. And boy, when Chris would beat me on a story back in the newspaper days, I had to wait 24 hours to catch up. And that sure was a tough feeling. Now, Chris beats everybody on a story. And, within about an hour, all of us will try to report what Chris reports. And Chris, it's got to be a challenging time for you, I think, with all the movement and the chain reaction. And, kind of give me your timeline or, kind of what happened with that whole Nick Saban retirement, because it really seemed like it turned college football upside down fast.
Well, Mike, I appreciate it. It's good to catch up. I've not seen anything like it, man. Just the domino effect that's taken place all over the country. They say the portal giveth and it taketh away. Well, look at teams like Ohio State, for instance, who's benefited. Texas, who's benefited. A lot of schools. All these guys leaving from Alabama, and some of them had left, were going to leave before, Saban retired. But once he retired, you had some really good players. Jaden Proctor goes to Iowa. Caleb Downs goes to Ohio State. Isaiah Bond, the hero of the Auburn game, goes to Texas. But Washington, look at what happened in Washington. DeBoer goes to Alabama. Jed Fish goes from Arizona to Washington. You see a lot of those kids from Arizona leaving, and now Alabama's starting to cash in a little bit. They get Parker Brailsford, the center for Washington, comes in, and Alabama needs a center. I think they got a great chance to get the corner, Muhammad, who was a really good player for Washington. So that's just where we are now, man. And you know it. I told you were kind enough to come on my show last night. I think if Kirby, and I'm not suggesting this is going to happen at all, okay? This is just a hypothetical. If Kirby were to take, say, the Falcons job tomorrow, then I think you would see something similar at Georgia. Players go to play for Kirby Smart. They go to play for Nick Saban. They go to play for Caleb DeBoer. And a lot of those guys would leave because, and I was listening to you a little bit, everyone's looking for a new deal, a better deal, to double their deal. And every kid's got an agent, an attorney, who's sort of shopping them around. Certainly in these situations where you got a 30-day window, if your coach leaves, to sort of get in the portal. And I know a lot of fans don't like it, and certainly coaches don't like it, but it's just where we are right now. And I think it's up to the coaches, it's up to the staffs, until something changes, and I don't know when it is, to figure out a way to manage it and adapt and evolve, because the ones who do that and learn to sort of live in this era and figure it out are the ones who are going to probably be better off for it.
No doubt, Chris. Talking with Chris Lowe of ESPN, ESPN.com. You've read him, you've seen him, does tremendous work. Chris, if I give you the crystal ball, and nobody seems to has all the answers, 2 questions. Number one, whose job is it to have the answers? I don't sense a whole lot of leadership from the NCAA right now. And then number 2, what would you suggest as far as the schedule? How can we clean this up where there's a little bit more order to this, and we don't see this overlap of the schedule where it just, like I said, I don't think Goodwill Hunting could solve this problem.
Yeah, I'll tell you who I don't have a lot of confidence in that's going to solve it, and that's Congress. And anybody who's sitting around and waiting for some type of congressional deal or bill or Congress to step in, senators to step in and say, all right, this is the answer. This is going to fix it all. I wouldn't hold my breath on that, Mike. I would say, again, I don't have a crystal ball either, but first of all, do we still need 2 signing dates? I mean, that might help some of it as far as the calendar. I don't know that we need 2 signing dates right now. June used to be a time which was pretty. I mean, you remember when we were covering the SEC in the early 2000s, June was a pretty tame time. Coaches, you didn't have all these guys coming on campus on visits, and now it's the month of June. You talk to a coach, it's crazy. Here's what I think was going to happen, and I can't give you a time frame necessarily, but I think football is going to break away from the NCAA. And I don't know if that's in 2 years or 5 years. But I think there's going to be a big conglomerate of teams, the halves. Is it 32? Is it 40? Is it 48? I don't know. And I think they're going to play their own playoff, Mike. I think there will be a commissioner. I think they'll have their own governance. I think players will have their own representation to represent their own deals. And I know you're going to say, everybody will say, wait a minute, that sounds like employed. It sounds like pro football. It really is sort of already is pro football. It's just that players don't have contracts. They can move around as much as they want and get a better deal. Coaches do have contracts and have to pay buyouts. And I'm not saying that the players shouldn't get paid, but that's where, as I talk to people, and I'm sure you have too, administrators and coaches and people a part of the game all say they think that they're moving, or the game is moving in that direction. Not every sport per se, but football. And I just have a hard time seeing football in 3, 4, 5 years from now being controlled or governed by the NCAA.
Yeah, I'm with you, Chris, and it makes a lot of sense. And football is different than the other sports. Talking with Steve Forbes, another guy that you and I know quite well at Wake Forest, and he's saying, now you got Stanford and Cal joining the ACC. I mean, okay, for football, that's maybe 1 or 2 games a year, but think about basketball and think about some of these other sports. I mean, how realistic is it, to think that these schools can afford to travel across the country? I mean, Oregon and Washington and in the Big Ten. I mean, that is one thing that I do think that the SEC's done right, and that's maintained a degree of geographical integrity. Now, it's not perfect. I mean, it's a long way from Gainesville to Austin, Texas, but for the most part, all these states are congruent with one another. So I'm with you, Chris. I think we'll, now, you spell it out like that. It makes a lot of sense. It fits with the 12-team playoff. I want to narrow this down. I know our audience is excited to have you on here talking to Chris Lowe. He's a national college football writer. He really knows the SEC extremely well. When we look at next season, and at the beginning of the show or beginning of your segment, you were talking about some of the programs that have benefited greatly, Ohio State and Texas particularly. What other teams in the SEC do you think we're going to see make a big jump thanks to this portal and and the players that they've taken in during this window?
I think right at the top of the list, Mike, is the portal king, Lane Kiffin. When you look at what he's done really the last couple of years, it's not easy, to every year sort of plug and play and continue to have continuity in your locker room. But he seemed to do it pretty well. And they've gone out and they've gotten receivers, they've gotten defensive players. They really wanted to beef up on defense. And they went and they got a couple guys, Walter Nolan in particular, who was one of the top 4 or 5 players in the country a few years ago. They're in the middle of their defensive line. They've continued to sort of bring in offensive linemen, tight ends. And, he's won 10 games 2 of the last 3 years. And been able to, this year goes to the bowl game and wins 11 games. So his roster is going to look different. I think you've always got to have a quarterback, Mike, And you know that. Jackson Dart now will be his third year. He's seen it all. He's played on some big stages. The fact that he's back, the tight end's back. I think Trey Harris has got a chance to be one of the better receivers in college football if he can stay healthy. And they should be better and deeper on defense. So, outside of the usual suspects, Texas and Georgia, I look at Ole Miss and say, hey, Ole Miss has got a chance, especially now. And what's a different landscape? You don't have to be the top SEC team or one of the top two. I think if you're a top 4 SEC team now in a 12-team playoff, most years you're going to get in.
Yeah, I think you're right, Chris. Talking with Chris Lowe of ESPN.com. A couple teams I want to ask you about, Chris. Brian Kelly's a guy that came into the league and did a fantastic job. Notre Dame's all-time winningest coach. I thought that he was a little underrated when he first came to the league. He comes in, he beats Alabama, goes to the SEC championship game. Some troubles defensively this year. Some rumors he might end up at Michigan. Tell me what you think about that, A. And then B, Josh Heupel in Tennessee. The Vols were number 1 there, according to the college football playoff, not last year, but the year before. And this is just a coach that strikes me as being really good and having a really explosive scheme in Tennessee, obviously with a lot of means and a lot of money. Tell me what you think about those two coaches and those two programs in the next year or two.
Well, I'll say this about Brian Kelly. He certainly didn't waste any time in overhauling his defensive staff this year. A lot of people would have maybe not have acted that quickly, but he goes out and he brings, Blake Baker in from Missouri, and a guy who done a really, really nice job there at Missouri. When you look at what Drinkwitz was able to do this year in their breakthrough season, and there was so much talk about Missouri on offense, and they were good, but I thought the difference in what Missouri did this year was on defense, and how good they were in key games. I think bringing Blake Baker over, I think helps, and just say, listen, what we did last year on defense is unacceptable at a place like LSU, and it should be. I mean, there's no reason LSU, with all the athletes and the people they recruit, should ever be that porous on defense. And I think getting Harold Perkins back to being Harold Perkins will be a big deal for LSU this year. And I think Blake will do that. He's too impactful, Mike, of a defender. He just, at times this year, you just didn't really know that he was on the field. I think you'll see that change next year. Tennessee, Heupel accomplished more in year 2 than anybody would have dreamed. Getting Tennessee to 11 wins. You're right. When Tennessee and Georgia played it there in Athens, Tennessee was 1 and Georgia was 2, which probably that was the worst thing for Tennessee, because what Kirby was doing all week leading up to that game, and it turned out just that way. Georgia dominated that football game, certainly physically. This year, not as good. They didn't win any key games. They weren't as consistent or as explosive on offense, but they were still respectable. And I think in year 4, we'll see where they go. Again, much like Ole Miss, Tennessee doesn't have to win the conference or be in the top 2. If they can get in that top 4, we're going to see the quarterback, Nico, who is, by all intents and purposes, I think he's got unbelievable arm talent. He's got touch. He's one of those guys that I think, just from a physical skill set, is exactly what you want in a quarterback. We'll see how durable he is. When people come after him and hit him. We saw him in one game this past year against Iowa in the Citrus Bowl, and he looked pretty good. But this is his team going forward, and I think probably as important as anything, Mike, is how good is Tennessee around him? Can they protect him? Does he have guys at the playmaking positions that can make some plays for him? And can Tennessee continue to run the football, which they've done pretty consistently under Josh Heupel? So I put about Georgia's the best team in the league, the most talented team. They got the best roster. I think Texas is pretty close. After that, though, I think there's, 5 teams, maybe 6, 5 certainly, that have a chance to sort of jockey for position. Alabama, Missouri, Ole Miss, Tennessee. I think all of those teams, if you ask me right now, who do you think's got a legitimate chance to make the playoff, I would say all those teams. And depending on how healthy they stay, how does the quarterback play at LSU? There's a lot of questions like that. But I do think it's going to be pretty fascinating come November next year, when you're going to have, what would you say, Mike, 6 or 7 teams to start the month in November that have a somewhat realistic chance to make a 12-team playoff.
Yeah, sure. I think the SEC do a really good job scheduling that. Chris, you're going to have an All-American team, I guess, coming out a little bit later this week. Can you give us any sneak previews, any ideas? Are going to be a lot of SEC guys, or is it going to be the all SEC and all Big Ten team? Because when I look in the portal, it looks like those two conferences are dominating the transfer portal right now.
Well, they're going to dominate football. And I know people maybe in the Big 12 and the ACC don't want to hear that, but those two conferences are sort of like, I mean, they're just sort of a planet by themselves right now, Mike. And I'm not saying no one can close some ground or make up some ground. I'm not saying that, but right now those two conferences, monetarily, talent, coaches. I mean, just look at the coaching lineup in the SEC and the Big Ten. It's phenomenal. So these All-American teams, and I've done them the last couple of years, we call it the way too early All-American team. It's really hard to do because you're doing a lot of projecting. You know, you're trying to figure out, all right, this guy's moving to this team. Is he going to switch positions? How's he going to fit in that defensive system? I mean, Caleb Downs is a great example. I mean, I'll sort of give something like Caleb Downs is going to be on our All-America team. I don't know if there's a better safety in the country. There's some maybe comparable, but he's going from Bama to Ohio State. So how does he fit in that system? How does he fit in that defense? I think he will because he's so talented. But it's hard at this time of year, especially when you start picking offensive linemen and even interior defensive linemen. You know, because a lot of those guys that are all draft picks are gone. So you got to sort of find that guy who had maybe a big freshman year, maybe a guy who didn't have as big a role as a sophomore, was solid, but then breaks out as a junior. And I can tell you that Georgia's certainly going to be represented. As I looked at the offensive line, Mike, as I was trying to figure out who, you know, we're doing a first and a second team. And I knew this already, but when you start doing your homework and talking to people and talking to scouts, I was blown away at how good Georgia should be. Even losing a guy like Van Pratt,
right?
How good and how strong I think they'll be in the offensive line again next year.
Yep, I think we'll probably see a guy or two. You know, one of the things that makes the Georgia team so good is, you know, they get to compete against guys that are really good in practice. And I'll tell you this, Chris, and I'll tell the audience this too. You know, back in the day, practices were open, and Tennessee would have these double session practices, and you'd have to get there at about 7 a.m. And I knew that I had to be there at 7 because I knew Chris would be there. So you want to talk about somebody making you better. Working alongside of you, Chris, for years made me better, and I'm really glad to have you on the show tonight. I really enjoy your work at ESPN.com. I think you do a phenomenal job. You're a go-to guy and a great source of information. I want to thank you for coming on tonight, and hope I can get you on again this offseason, my friend.
Yeah, I'd be glad to, Mike. Sorry about the technical difficulties there to start, but it's always good to catch up and talk some football. And as you know, man, it's always college football season in the SEC.
It is. You stay safe up there, Chris. I know you got a little ice and snow left to deal with. Chris Lowe from ESPN.com. Coming up next, it's the hot and cold segment. It's brought to you by Anytime Heating, Cooling, and Plumbing. Stay with me. We're going to talk about Georgia football, who needs to get hot, and the coldest take that I have seen of the week from one of Chris's ESPN teammates. We'll be right back after this message from Anytime Heating, Cooling, and Plumbing.
Want to make sure your family stays comfortable all year long? Our family of trained comfort specialists are available anytime to service or repair your system. Or it may be time to replace your old units with a new Trane HVAC system.
We are a locally owned family business, and we carefully select the technicians who we send into your home.
At Anytime Heating, Cooling, and Plumbing, we are large enough to handle all of your HVAC and plumbing needs,
but small enough to care.
Call today to take advantage of our 3-visit annual maintenance plan.
Welcome back to the program. I hope you enjoyed that segment with Chris Lowe. Chris does a dynamite job. I've known Chris for, probably 1998, right? 25 years now, and he just keeps doing fantastic work and breaking news. Love his All-American teams. Love all the previews that he does. And when I think about ESPN.com and their college football, Chris has led the way, true leader in our industry. And you guys heard the breakdown. I mean, it just doesn't get any better than that. So I appreciated having him on, making time for him. And we'll try to get him on again this off season. We've had a lot of great guests. Obviously, there's been a lot of folks from the SEC network that have come on, and other beat writers from other programs. We want to try to continue that as much as we can. And we're getting into the basketball now, and I'm gonna want to talk more basketball. I'm just gonna give you a heads up that if this basketball team takes care of business against LSU and maintains this pace, I think Georgia basketball is coming around. And baseball is right around the corner, and so softball. And I'll tell you, I think Georgia softball has a World Series team. And this new baseball coach is talking to his players about Omaha. And I'm not ready to say Georgia baseball is going to Omaha, especially when you look at the rigors of the SEC and how challenging it is. But I think this team is going to have an edge. I want a quick look at SEC basketball standings here. I'm looking at this. Auburn, number 1. Bruce Pearl is a phenomenal coach. He's one of the top 5 coaches in the country. He's a guy I covered for 6 years, know him really well. Fantastic person, fantastic motivator. I would have never thought that Bruce Pearl could win at Auburn, but that goes to show you the value of a fantastic coach. Kentucky, number 2. I don't know that anybody's playing any better. You heard me talking about the 7'2", 235-pound Croatian that shoots 3-pointers. Like I said, it's just something out of a video. You saw Tennessee. Tennessee came in here. They look like an NBA team with this Dalton Connect guy. I mean, looks like Dirk Nowitzki or something. I mean, the guy knocks down everything, can get to the rim. Those 3 teams are all Final Four potential teams. And then you get into the next level. I see Alabama sitting there 4-1, really good team. And then at 3-2, you've got South Carolina, Georgia, and LSU. Georgia has already gone and won at South Carolina. That was a really big win. A lot of people still projecting Carolina in the NCAA tournament, even while they leave Georgia out. This is why LSU is such a big game. The Tigers are 3-2. This is a team Georgia is going to have to play well. I think LSU has more talent, but I think Georgia is a better team. I don't know if that makes sense, but Wednesday night at 6:30 at the Stag, that place is going to be rocking. That promotions team, they're going to do everything they can to give Georgia a home court advantage. And then I look at some teams that are 2-3. Ole Miss. That Ole Miss was a team that started 13-0. Okay, and then I think Tennessee beat them by 30. All of a sudden, they're 2-3. Mississippi State, that's a team that beat Tennessee in Starkville on their home court right before Georgia played them. So, and then there's Florida 2-3 in the league. Mike White gets a chance to go into Gainesville Saturday and knock those Gators out. Buzz Williams and A&M 2-3. Are you kidding me? I mean, this guy, you talk about a fantastic coach and resources and money. Unbelievable. And then at 1-4, here's Arkansas, 1-4. I mean, this team was picked to finish in the top 3 in the league. They're 1-4. And then at the bottom, Missouri and Vanderbilt 0-5. But man, what a great start. You heard Jimmy Dykes talk about Georgia flipping the team. I think it's still a little soon to say that, but I'm getting very optimistic with Jabri Abdur-Rahim and Silas Demery Jr. These 2 guys, they really impress me. There's some other good players. Melendez is a great player. Thompson's a great player. So many good players on that team that continue. But I've written about it. These are guys that have transferred in from other places. Justin Hill, big shot maker, clutch guy. These are guys that transferred in from other places. They're on their second, third, and final chance. All right. Most of these guys are either going to travel overseas or play in developmental leagues and never see the NBA. But they got a couple guys that could make it. Jabri Abdur-Rahim is making a believer out of me. He is making a believer out of me with the jump that he has made, his 3-point shooting, his leadership, his poise. I think he needs to continue to work on his body and get more physical. And Silas Demery Jr., I don't know what to say about this guy. 6'4", explosive, confident. I hope he stays another year. I don't think he's a one-and-done type. I think he's a guy that could get bigger, stronger, better, faster, more savvy, work himself into a first-round pick, improve the outside shot. And Mike White's doing a really good job. So I've got to say all those things because they deserve it. And I know that Georgia basketball history is lacking. There's been, one regular season championship since 1931, a couple of tournament championships. I mean, it's been tough. It's been tough for whatever reason. The culture has never really been there. I think Hugh Durham had it going. I thought he was a fantastic coach. I thought Tubby Smith, there were signs of life there. Jim Herrick, will always wonder what would have been. But I think Mike White, Mike's at a point in his career where he's got something to prove too. The people in Florida had given up on him. And that was unfortunate. This is a classy guy, first-class coach, and I think he's coaching with a chip on his shoulder. I think Mike White knows that people had given up on him, and he's going to try to show it, working with Josh Brooks, the athletic director. These guys are going to try to prove something to the world. So it's a fun program to cover right now. Now, getting to my hot and cold segment. Love this segment. I want to thank Jay Black for coming up with this idea of breaking it down like this. So Heather Dinich, who I have a ton of respect for, I mean, she's got a thankless job having to report on the College Football Playoff Committee, and I think she knocks it out of the park. I think she is fantastic. She is an unbelievable journalist. But I'm going to disagree with her on something, and it's in my story. If you read that, she said that Georgia's path to the SEC championship game has been easier because they've been in the East, and I kind of disagree with that, especially the last 2 years. I think about last season, when you think about Georgia's crossover game from the West, it was against Ole Miss. I mean, that was a top 10 team. And when you look at the highest ranked team not to make the SEC championship game, it was Missouri. So Georgia played the number 3 and number 4 team in the league. So I don't think you can say the East was that down. They played Bama. They played Auburn too. The same Auburn that Bama was lucky. Let's face it, I was there covering that game. They were the Milroe Miracle, that 4th and 31. I just knew we needed to cover it. I mean, that game never disappoints. That's a team that had Alabama beat. They outplayed Alabama that day. So I'm going to disagree with Heather on that. And the year before, you heard Chris and I talking about Tennessee being number 1 for one of the college football playoff rankings. Georgia had to go through them. That Tennessee team beat Alabama and LSU. So I don't think in Missouri was good. So I don't think the East has necessarily been, just a bunch of doormats. Now, Vanderbilt's pretty awful and doesn't care about football. We know that. But other than Vandy, I mean, heck, even South Carolina a couple years ago, beats Clemson, knocks Clemson out of the daggone college football playoff, essentially, out of the top 4. So I think the East has had more teeth. And I think that narrative has just existed so long that people just kind of repeat it without really looking closer at it the last couple of years and seeing that, wow, Georgia has had to go through some tough teams in the East Division and with the crossover teams that they've had to play. So I thought Dinich did a fantastic job, though, isolating the top games next year. They're going to have the biggest impact on the 12-team playoff. We're kind of rewiring our brains right now on all of college football. And you heard me talk about that in the first segment when I was talking about the Dooley code and how you can't get, hyperactive over players coming and going because things have changed now, and minding your social media manners, a little bit of a lecture from me on that. And I was not always the best on that, folks. If you really want to dig into my Twitter and go back to 2009, I probably got into some Twitter beefs that I shouldn't have. I remember when Dan Woken was covering Memphis basketball and I was covering Bruce Pearl and Tennessee, and me and Woken used to get into these ridiculous Twitter beats. They're probably buried. So you could go back and turn me into a hypocrite and say, well, Mike, you're giving us this lecture about social media manners. And we went back and saw you and Woken trolling each other for a couple of years, saw you arguing with people. I don't do that anymore. I don't want my blood pressure to go up, especially if I don't even know your name, much less and I'm certainly not going to go after someone that I don't know. So we've had to rewire our brains with how we feel about, manners on social media and how we talk about recruits, and, don't wonder out loud about their family. That's not cool to do. And we've got to rewire our brains about football next year, because now it's a 12-team playoff. And I still think every weekend matters, because there's 4 teams that get a bye. And I think that bye is huge. And all you got to do is look at Georgia last year. What if Georgia had a bye and didn't have to play Alabama in the SEC title game? Could they have used some rest? I mean, the Georgia that I saw, and I know Florida State was missing some guys, but did you see Ladd McConkey against Florida State? If that Ladd McConkey that played against Florida State and ran through him like some ridiculous video game character was healthy like that against Bama, Georgia would have won that game. But as it was, they were beat up, they were tired. So I think those 4 teams that get a bye, and you've got to be a conference champion, the 4 highest ranked conference champions get a bye in next year's college football playoff. And then it goes 5, 12, 6, 11, 7, 10, 8, 9 on campuses, right? And then you get into the second round that are going to be played at the New Year's Six bowl sites. So I think every weekend still matters, but you heard what Chris was saying about 6 or 7 teams when we go into month of November that are still going to be able to find their way into the playoff. And what Heather Dinich did in the story, it was a Payside article, so I'm not going to copy and paste everything. I mean, ESPN Plus is, I pay for it. They do fantastic work, but I did take some snippets out of there that involve Georgia and wrote about it, kind of promote her piece a little bit, and also give you information. I love this headline: Chris Lowe debates Mike Griffith. I don't know that we really debated too much. I don't really debate with Chris. He makes me laugh too much anytime we start to argue, but we certainly had a spirited discussion. But getting back to Heather Dinich, Georgia, she named Georgia, 2 of Georgia's games as being the most impactful games of next season on the college football playoff. And I totally agree. Number 1, Georgia at Texas, October 19th. I've already got the date memorized. I don't remember many dates. I mean, seriously, I'm embarrassed to tell you some dates I forget, but I remember that date. I remember October 19th. I remember that's Austin. I got my hotel rooms. If you don't got yours, good luck. And oh, by the way, there's a Formula One race there that weekend. This town is going to be so packed. And it's did Texas do that on purpose? Did Texas schedule Georgia on a weekend that would make it hard for Georgia people to go? I'll admit, I do wonder, a little conspiracy theory. I wonder. It's going to be hard to get a room. So if you haven't got a room for October 19th, that's a game you need to go to. I'm just going to tell you, you're going to want to go to that game. You're going to want to go to that game, period. And it is the number 1 game on the schedule. And I haven't been this excited about a regular season game in a long time. Preseason. Now, when Georgia played Tennessee in a number 1 versus number 1, yeah, I was pretty excited about that game. And when Georgia played Ohio State in that Peach Bowl, I was pretty excited about that game. Georgia, Texas, though, preseason. I've never been to Darrell Royal Stadium for a game. I went there for basketball. In fact, Chris and I were both covering the Vols and went there for a basketball game when Rick Barnes was at Texas. But we didn't go to a football game there. So I'm really looking forward to Georgia, Texas on October 19th. The number 2 game is Georgia, Alabama. That's going to be Kalen DeBoer's SEC opener for Alabama. Georgia is going to have played Kentucky earlier. Their SEC opener is on the road at Kentucky. I mean, Georgia's schedule next year is no joke. I mean, this year's schedule kind of started slow and then crescendoed, with those 3 top 25 games in Georgia Tech in November. Next year, just the opposite. You got Clemson come out of the gate. I mean, Clemson's won 5 games. Clemson is not going to be a pushover. I mean, they've won 5 games in a row. Dabo is not going to be a pushover. I'm just telling you, it's not as good at Clemson as they saw in Charlotte, but Dabo Swinney is not going to be a pushover, especially after he got disrespected by Alabama the way he did. And that was shameful and wrong of Alabama that they didn't give him an interview. But that is going to be one fired up Dabo Swinney. That is going to be one fired up Clemson team in Atlanta. Georgia's got to play Kentucky and Brock Vandagriff, we presume, expected to be the starter. Brock is a fantastic football player, a fantastic leader. He knows the Georgia offense quite well. They'll have a tremendous scouting report. And then Georgia plays Alabama on the 28th after a bye week. Kirby has won 20 straight games when he has more than a week to prepare. Just an incredible streak, just speaks to Kirby. So those are 2 super hot games. I think the Georgia-Clemson game, Clemson's going to try to make the playoff. I think Georgia-Tennessee could affect the playoff. I think Georgia at Ole Miss. You get to talking about next year, just a sizzling hot schedule. But the cold take is that somehow Georgia had an easier road to the SEC championship game because they were in the East. Because, again, I cite Tennessee being good 2 years ago. And last year, obviously Missouri was the best team in the league that wasn't Alabama or Georgia, and Ole Miss was right behind. Dogs played both of them. I want to thank everybody for joining me tonight. I enjoy doing the show. I look forward to the opportunity to speak at length, pick my topics. I mean, listen, I love coming on with Brandon Adams on Wednesdays with DawgNation Daily. Those spots are fun. Never really know what BA is going to ask me. I enjoy doing that show. Enjoy doing 92.9 The Game in Atlanta with Steak and Sandra. Do that on Tuesdays. I always enjoy that. Enjoy the spots on the Ref in Athens on Monday mornings. at 8:30. Do that with Logan and Dave. And WJOX in Birmingham. Do that spot every Tuesday at about 11:40 on a show called Three Man Front. And on occasion, we'll do a little Feinbaum action in the SEC Network. In season, it's every week on Thursdays. Out of season, kind of hit and miss. Paul had me on last week. And gosh, all I did was tell people how it was. And some folks got really mad. Of course, we have that up on our YouTube, our DawgNation YouTube, if you want to see that interview. So it's just a lot of interviews all week long. But this show in particular is a lot of fun because I get an opportunity to kind of zero in on a lot of the messages that I want to share with you. And I get to bring a lot of guests on. And it's always special for me to share, my friends in the business with you, people that I've known and gotten to know over the years, people that are my go-to people. When I have a question, I call sources, players, coaches, parents, but I also call other media guys and get their takes. And I like to share those people with you so you can hear their wisdom and their insights because everybody sees it from a different angle. And tonight, Chris Lowe was kind enough to join us. Really appreciated that. So I want to thank my producer, Michael Carvel. Thank you very much. Don't forget tomorrow, DawgNation Daily, 10 a.m. Wednesday night, it's Jeff Santel. Before the Hedges. And then Thursday night, there's this cool show with Kaylee and Connor. Hopefully you've gotten an opportunity to see that. And man, who knows what's going to happen next. I know this, tomorrow night, I'm going to be at that Georgia LSU game at 6:30. Must-win game for Mike White and the Dogs. Be interested to see how much they can get the steak packed out in a 6:30 p.m. game. Everybody have a fantastic week. If you're looking for me on Twitter, at Mike Griffith 32, please feel free. Ask questions, make comments. Love the interaction, love the feedback. Be safe. Have a great weekend, everybody.